and welcome back to Chatting with Chaz. So happy to have you here today. Today is going to be a fantastic topic, a topic that a lot of you have asked for us to dive into. I've listened to you in DMs, I've gotten emails, all about trying to understand narcissism. What does that even mean? We hear that term all the time. It's thrown around lightly, loosely. So today we're going to dive in. I've invited a dear friend of mine and my therapist, Allison Hill, a psychologist that I met on my journey, and she was a pivotal person really in my mental health and understanding more about this topic and how it really, once I understood it, changed my life. So, meet my friend Allison. Allison, introduce yourself. Tell us about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me. And as always, I applaud your openness and willingness to share this, just because I think so many people probably silently struggle in different ways. And I have a lot of clients who wouldn't put themselves out there. So the fact that you're doing that is really amazing for everyone. And I'm Allison Hill. I have my PhD in psychology and also my law degree. So I work with a lot of families in transition, going through divorce, individuals going through divorce, couples, co-parenting, and primarily also making sure we keep focused on the kids as they go through a divorce as well.
I really feel like that's what you did during my journey. Every time we would meet, she wanted to dive into kind of what was happening with me, but we always wrapped up with, tell me what's going on with the kids. And specifically, you would name you would call them by name. And you're like, tell me about Christian, tell me about Riley, tell me about Jacqueline, how's she doing in school? And you always wanted to know how they were dealing with divorce because it's such a brutal time.
Well, and I think most people come through my door because they're concerned about their kids, and maybe they don't even realize how much they need to focus on themselves and how much they have to learn about themselves, because it is a balance.
Yes.
But people come in saying, I want to know how this is going to impact my kids. And I never want to lose that for people, even as people evolve and grow and learn more about themselves. But the kids are probably why we're all there, quite frankly.
Yes. I mean, that was one of the reasons I kind of fell in love with you. Is
the feeling is mutual.
Yes, we kind of fell in love. Well, we had our first couple dates, and then I kind of ghosted you. And we'll get into that, which you reminded me of today. But
it happens.
Yes, it happens. I'll share a little bit about my journey. I met with other biblical counselors along the way in my life, going through difficult circumstances, difficult things. And, I had gone to Bible college, and I felt pretty well-rounded with scripture. And then the therapist I met, again, very biblically based, which was great. And I was trying to do all the biblical things, but then I kept hitting a wall, and I found myself really waiting on God. And then I thought, well, maybe I'm missing something because I'm trying to do all the things. I was a doer. And so I met you because I was sitting in my attorney's office.
Yes.
And I was just going to meet with an attorney to kind of get my ducks in a row.
Consider my options.
Yes. That's a good way to put it.
It's always good to get the information.
Yes. And as I was considering my options, Tina, my attorney, she just didn't understand my hesitation on why I wouldn't want to get a divorce after she heard a little bit about my marriage story. And I think she knew that I needed to see a psychologist.
Yes.
And when I
think she might have walked you down to my office.
She did. She's like, I don't think you're going to go, so let's go. And let's walk down. Because
so again, you're building your team.
I was. And I will tell you, we should even talk about that. Well, I was building my team with you because I didn't really realize it, but I knew I was going to be in for the fight of my life, but I did not know how difficult it would be. And so it was such a gift to have you help me navigate divorce, navigate it with the kids, navigate it for my mental health.
Yes.
It was
and validate huge. What you were going through.
Yes.
I mean, I think when you initially came in, I could tell the fact that I understood so quickly what it looked like for you almost shocked you.
It did.
Like you couldn't believe it. And I also think you thought you were going to change it and you were going to stick it out.
Yes.
And so, you left for a while until you were really ready to come in.
Because you knew day one. Do you think you kind of knew day one?
Well, I knew day one that something was going to have to shift in your relationship.
Yes.
And what I had sitting in front of me was a person who was completely willing to make any shift. I think if I told you to wear a banana suit and make lasagna every night, you were going to do it.
Yes.
The problem is I never met your ex, but I didn't get the idea that he might be willing to also shift for you.
Right.
And no matter whether you're in a healthy relationship or a dysfunctional one, you have to both kind of commit to changing and evolving together.
Yes.
And you were right there willing to work. And I think at the time you were going to hang in the marriage because I think your faith was driving you to do that.
Yes. That's exactly right. I think with biblical counseling, I knew that there was no option. And so then I met you. And I think when I came into your office, I had everyone telling me kind of what you told me, but I thought, well, it's my sister. She loves me. And my friends are all telling me what I want to hear. So when I went into your office and Tina said, I want you to meet and I want you to now make an appointment and come back alone. I did it, but I was like, I'm not getting a divorce. I mean, I just can't. And then I walked in and I feel like you did understand immediately so much. And it kind of scared me because I was like, oh, I want to know the truth. And this is the truth. Yeah. This is really what would be most beneficial and the healthiest thing for me. And then you unveiled a lot of things that I didn't really understand in a greater magnitude.
Of course. I tend to be direct. And in my world, I always say, the families who I see don't have any more time or money to waste.
Yes.
Usually they're working with attorneys. Maybe there's a guardian ad litem involved.
Yes.
There are a lot of professionals involved because the family needs such holding during that time.
Yes.
I mean, the research bears out again and again that working as a team, whether with attorneys, with a guardian, with different therapists, really helps move a family through successfully.
Yes.
But we don't want to keep you guys in that state of crisis.
Yes.
And there's a reason why divorce is one of the most stressful things anyone can go through. Even under the best circumstances, it's a very, very hard time.
It is.
So as you know, I tend to get right to the point.
Yes. And that
so
doesn't
work
that.
for everyone.
It doesn't. And I think that's why I ghosted you.
It's okay. It's okay.
But I think it was because I wasn't ready to hear the truth. And I think you probably would know me better because it seems like you do. But I think after a couple times, I knew that you weren't just telling me what I wanted to hear, but what was necessary, what was healthy, mentally healthy, what was healthy for me, healthy for our children, healthy for him. Yes. And so I knew I had to make a big decision, but I just thought, let me just give it one more effort. And I kind of shut you down and I stopped going to see Tina. Mm-hmm. I just kind of went silent.
Yes. Which is also fair.
Yes.
And sometimes people hear that and then they shift and they say, we're going to dive back into this relationship. Yes. And that's fair too. We support your family's journey wherever it goes.
Yes.
We don't have an agenda.
Yes.
But certainly I think feedback is hard.
Yes.
It's hard for any of us to hear, and most of us need it all day, every day. And I think what separates a dysfunctional person from someone who has what I would call psychological ego strength is the person that can come back, can tolerate hearing it.
Yes.
We all feel that initial, they don't know me. What are they saying? But can you tolerate that?
Yes.
And even when I sit with families in a room and I feel someone responding to my feedback, I want to validate for them. I know this is hard to hear. Mm-hmm. It's hard to hear. Yes. But I know you can also tolerate it, and I'm right here with you.
Right.
I'm not trying to drop this bomb and leave you to manage it by yourself.
Right.
But I do think if we want to get to the root of what's going on, we have to lean into it.
Yes. And that's what was fantastic about you. In your way, you were strong, you were firm, you were factual, like you took information and it was backed up with facts and like clinical facts. And I think I needed that because I kept thinking I had the power to change everyone and everything. And if I could just be happier, everybody would be happy, and that was not the case. So I finally reached out to you when things imploded at the end of the year. And when I came back to your office, that's kind of when we went to the next level.
Absolutely.
Don't you feel?
Yeah. I think you got to your, crisis moment or rock bottom, which, as I say to people all the time, when people come to my office and say, this might be rock bottom, you can only go up from there.
You can only go up from there. That's true. That's a great way to look at it.
So that's okay.
Yes.
And we don't want to get worse.
Yes.
And sometimes it does. Right. And
yes.
I think that's what you also realized is, I think what Tina recognized and I recognized from the beginning is this was not going to be an easy journey. Even if you were willing to do the hard work and try to handle it in the most mature way, it was going to be very, very hard for circumstances outside of your control.
Yes.
And I think us preparing you for that too.
Huge.
Was helpful. I can remember times you coming in and you being like, I can't believe this is happening. You said it was going to happen like this, and it's happening.
You did. You did. You definitely. Well, this is, I think, what was so amazing is when you started opening up this door of narcissism. And so it's very predictable.
Yes.
I didn't understand what narcissism, and that's where we'll start. I didn't really understand what it meant. But then when you opened up, it was almost like you put the lens on, you've talked about, of what that looks like and how it manifests. Now I understand why you were a predictor. Because I'm like, it's actually happening what you're saying. And you're like, oh, and then this has happened. The next week I'd come and see you. We had a standing appointment. I think it was on Mondays. And I cleared my books because it was such an emotional day for me. It was attorney days and therapist day. And it was a day I'd leave your office and I'd process everything you'd say. I'd sit in my car. I don't know if you know this, after we'd meet, and I would take notes because I was like, I don't want to forget what she said, because it was the fight of my life. And you kept telling me it would be, and it was not going to be easy, but there were tools you needed.
Absolutely. And I've never met your ex, so I would never diagnose him or say what he was. But we do know that people who make a divorce more high conflict have certain characterological pathology. And I think that narcissism is certainly a buzzword that everyone loves to throw around. But there are telltale signs of engaging with that type of personality, and especially once they feel like they are fighting for something, that we can kind of predict the way it's going to play out if that person does resemble those traits. And I also just want to be clear that, I think in all of our relationships, there are toxic moments and there are toxic patterns, right?
Yes.
And I think distinguishing between that, is my partner and I, are we having a toxic moment, right? Did we just fight over kind of that parenting decision, or where we want our child to do X, Y, or Z? Or is this kind of an ongoing pattern of engaging with a person that leaves me always feeling kind of just detonated and destroyed? And I think, starting to distinguish between those two things, because all relationships can have potentially toxic moments.
That is true. Trying to kind of decide, is it just we don't agree on something, which is kind of what I thought it was forever. Like, well, we just don't agree on anything, or I guess my opinion doesn't mean anything, but then that it was different. So how do there's, let's say, a woman listening, and she's like me. She just thinks if she could be better and better and better and better, she'll, be better. Everything will be better, right? And if there's a woman listening today and she's like, that's how I've operated, that's how I've done. I remember one of the key things you've told me that was a game changer, as you said, you're a manager. You're just managing constantly, and it's got to be exhausting. And I'm like, that's why I'm so tired. It's just managing an expectation, I think, and just a mood and a way. How do we see that? What are the signs that we're like, is this toxic? Is this we don't agree? Or this is narcissistic behavior and I can't fix that?
Yeah. I mean,
are there like certain things we should look for?
And you definitely are what I would call, that manager, that over functioner, right? Like if I can just create these interactions that are kind of pleasing to that other person, things will stay calm.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That was my MO.
Yes. And I think that is a telltale sign, right? If there's never a moment you can just kind of be you. I didn't get dinner made. The laundry isn't done. Your shirt isn't pressed. The kids are a little dirty. And if you think about it, it's not just for you, but for what we're modeling for our kids too, right? And what we're kind of creating. We don't want them to become overfunctioners and have to manage everyone. And we certainly don't want them to have to manage the adults in their lives. Right? That is not their job to manage us.
Which that was happening as well.
So when you start to notice that everyone is maybe managing one person in the family system, that is a sign.
That's a good word.
Yes. And like I said, narcissism is a buzzword. And certainly there's a lot of research showing how the American culture is swinging towards what some are even calling and writing about as a narcissism epidemic, right? I mean, with kind of the need to take the selfies and present, as perfectly, put together, and social media. And
we'll talk about that.
We just had Easter weekend, and I love all the family photos. But
family of perfect. Yes.
I don't think I posted one because I
didn't either.
My oldest was in a huge cast Easter weekend, so we weren't photo ready. But I feel like if you, we can all kind of be swept up in kind of where our culture is taking us. The difference, with someone who has a true dysfunctional disorder or kind of more characterological pathology is they have this overinflated sense of self, but they also have an inability to connect with people. Kind of a focus on relationships and valuing those relationships is missing for them. So it's not just someone who loves a good selfie. Hey, if I get that good family photo, boom, it's going up there. If my kids were here right now, I would want them to look you in the eye and shake your hand. And that reflects on my parenting. And that's my narcissism, right?
Yeah. There's probably a degree in everybody.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, all of these disorders that we deal with in my world are on a spectrum.
Yes. I remember you talking about the spectrum.
Yes. And so we all have these little pieces of ourselves. And sometimes they're pieces of ourselves that we recognize as things we want to work on.
Yes.
That we don't want to kind of indulge in anymore.
Exactly.
I might post something on social media and then really dislike myself for doing so because my kid's school is having a podcast on social media and our effect on kids. And I'm like, well, I just kind of played into this thing that might be detrimental. So it's okay to recognize those pieces in ourselves.
Correct.
But like all things, any behavior when taken to an extreme can become dysfunctional. Right.
Any behavior taken to an extreme can become dysfunctional.
Yes.
That is another good word. That's the stuff I would do when I'd get in the car and I'd write down all these things. I'm like, that's so true.
I mean, think about dieting, exercising. I mean, even therapy.
Yes.
Right. I mean, even these kind of good things, if you take any of it to an extreme.
Yes.
Right. It can really become dysfunctional. And debilitating.
Yes.
And paralyzing. In some ways.
Very true.
Right. And so that's what, we talked a lot about how to hold all the balance. Right. And juggle all the things.
That was what I feel like you brought to the table a lot was when I'd come there, I think, I was frazzled, I was trying to work and keep the business going and keep the kids going and keep the attorneys going and keep the legal team and then the attorneys for the business. It was just so much. And I would go in there and I would like breathe with you and you would kind of help me like, okay, what are you going to focus on today? Like, what's today? And then you would say, tell me about Christian, how's he, and you would kind of just all the stuff that was happening, you would help me just kind of bring it down and say, just focus on the well-being of the kids.
Yes.
And that is where I put my focus during that time. And I really think that you could either focus a lot on yourself and then that's not healthy.
Yep.
Or you could over focus on the kids and be like, oh my gosh, the kids and almost stress them out. Yes. But you were just like, just take care of the kids, breathe, take care of yourself.
And pulling you out of that managing function. So if you have been in a dysfunctional relationship and you're used to managing, I think you over-index on, if we think about buckets or pillars and parenting is one and work is one and faith is one.
Right.
I think you get into this habit, I don't mean you, all of us, where when I lay down at night, probably like many of us, I focus on the one that I didn't feel that day. Maybe I spent too much time at the office because I had a client in need and I didn't get home in time for bedtime.
Right.
Or I didn't get my run. As opposed to focusing on today was the day I sat with my client in need.
Yes.
And tomorrow I'll get up and make breakfast for my kids.
Yes.
And that will, so instead of also focusing on the domains where maybe we didn't excel or manage.
Right.
Where did we? Because I guarantee you in the day, in one of those buckets.
That's true.
You filled it.
Yes.
But also if you've been in a pattern where your partner or your spouse highlights the parts that you didn't do.
Yes.
And you didn't manage well, it is very hard to pull yourself out of that.
Yes.
And I think it's much easier to fall asleep if you focus, okay, I might have botched that today. Yes. But I did go for that run.
That was really something you did too. As you say that, it's bringing back memories of sitting in your office. And you also do Zoom as well. But I always wanted FaceTime with you because it was just like where I could breathe again. But it's true. I was definitely an over manager and I'd come in there like spent and frazzled. And then you were just like, but you're doing really good. I remember thinking I have to give myself grace. Yes. I wrote that down in my car. That I had to give myself grace after I left you because you were really good about saying, but this is what you are doing. Because I was believing the things said about me.
Yes.
I'm like,
I'm not enough. I'm not.
Yes. And you kept reminding me and it changed who I was. I started giving myself grace. And I think that is huge because I think a lot of us take this narrative given to us constantly.
Yes.
And then you become this narrative and then you're like, but but I am enough,
Absolutely. And we
that
want to
was
model that
huge.
for our kids.
Yes. And you want to model it for your kids.
We don't want them laying down at night thinking about all the places they failed.
Yes.
Right? Now, not that failure isn't okay, but in terms of how they kind of get that inner peace and that self-worth, we want them to recognize, I might not have done this well, but I did do this piece well. And I can give myself grace. I can have empathy for others. It's so important.
Yes.
But I think if you come from and even in couples work or relationship patterns, when any of us get dysregulated, we kind of resort to that inner childhood place, right? And it's actually very interesting work when you sit with someone for a long time, because you get a sense of what their childhood was probably like. When did they feel guilt? When did they feel shame? When did they feel scolded?
Right.
And so if you think about what you would say to your child in those moments, you would give them a big hug.
Right.
And say how proud they were. And it's the first thing we kind of lose for ourselves.
That's so true.
Gosh,
that's so true. That was a big impact in my life that you made with just that.
Yes.
And saying, be proud of this. And look at what you're doing. You have this business, or look at your kids. And it was huge when probably a lot of our listeners can relate, if you're kind of, again, this narrative that's playing all the time. And I think when I walked into your office, I was a different person when I walked out, especially months later after hearing truth versus lies.
Happy.
Yes. So I remember when I went to you and hearing a psychologist, it scared me, because I was like, that sounds like I'm crazy. So I was like, that's big. That might have been why it ghosted you as well. But it's something I do want to say, like that, a title, it did to me like a biblical counselor versus a psychologist. And I'm like, oh, it's bad. But it was really such a good thing. And for people not to be afraid to go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist.
Either one.
What's the difference?
So I have my PhD in psychology. A psychiatrist actually has a medical degree.
Gotcha.
And so they can prescribe medication.
Gotcha.
They also might do talk therapy. It just depends on how they run their practice. But again, there are times we work hand in hand. There are times when I might say to someone, let's also check in with a psychiatrist. Right. If, someone is so stressed out that they can't get out of bed, they can't get into my office because of, the years of abuse, or because our sessions are kind of peeling back these layers that are very overwhelming, we might need to kind of consult with a psychiatrist on a temporary basis. And that's
all okay.
It is so okay.
There's do you believe in your industry that there's just this feeling of, with mental health, that people have to see a therapist, they feel like something's wrong or they're broken, so they don't want to do it?
Well, there's definitely a stigma, which I think people are chipping away with.
It seems like
people like you who are willing to own, this was a low point in my life, and so I sought help. And that's okay. I think we have to consider also when people are going through a divorce and the adversarial process that involves.
Yes.
If it gets kind of contested and ugly, which we don't want for anyone, but it can. I think that then it becomes even kind of a greater threat, because people are using, people go for the jugular in these situations.
Yes, we know. Yes.
I always say to people in my office when they are ripping each other apart, I ask them, I'm like, would you get out of your car in the carpool line and knock on other parents' window and tell them how they were messing up parenting today?
Yeah, I
don't think so.
No.
So why are you going to tell your kids' other parent all the things they're doing wrong?
Yes.
Right? How's that going to help anyone? But I do think people get even more concerned about seeing a therapist in a divorce at a time where they probably need it the most.
I would highly recommend it. I don't think I could have.
But if you think that your ex is going to say, she's crazy, or he's
Which we
crazy,
kind of predicted. Yes.
And you happen to also be seeing Dr. Allison Hill, whose website says she specializes in high conflict divorce.
Yes.
It might kind of feel like it's a consistent data point with their story, which is why I think it's so important for me to work with your attorney or your guardian ad litem.
Which we had an incredible guardian.
You had a great guardian.
She was awesome. I'm going to call her. I should have her on.
You should have her on.
I really should. She was fantastic. And that's the beautiful thing. We didn't choose her. She was appointed to us, court appointed. And she saw, and she, people see, that's the other thing. People can see behaviors where really in a divorce, you always told me, you don't have to say a thing. Just stay, you know, you don't have to say a thing, but that people that deal with this every day, they're going to see.
Yes. It becomes very predictable.
Yes.
The playbook. And you have to think, I mean, and the research has borne that out. The majority of people who engage in what we call high conflict divorce, that don't have more of a collaborative or amicable divorce, the majority of them do have a mental health diagnosis and a personality disorder, narcissism being one of them, that we see a lot. So, I mean, and you have to think about it, people who are going to fight to the death for children, other human beings, there's something a little wrong about how they see the world.
Yes.
And we see that play out again and again in these cases.
Yes.
But certainly the first thing I say to a guardian ad litem if I'm working with someone is, aren't you so proud of this person for coming in to get support? And a good guardian will say, absolutely.
Wow.
I'm not going to hold this against this person. I'm so glad they're in your office because this is super stressful.
I did think that it would be used against me, that I was seeing a therapist. And it was part of the playbook.
And I think they do try to use it against you.
Yes. But it was, I will say to anyone going through this, and I really was going to just talk about narcissism, but divorce, that's how we met. You really, it is the best thing you could do, because it just helps. There's so much thrown at you and you want to filter it, and you want to say, well, is there any truth? I'm the type of person, and I've told you several times, I'm like, tell me my error, tell me what's wrong, tell me what I'm doing wrong. I want to hear, I want to grow, I want to change. It is so healthy when all these things are coming at you to have a filter, and a partner that is not biased, that's just going to shoot straight. That's what I love about you. You just shoot straight.
And not everyone loves that about me, but I do
love
shoot
it.
straight.
It's refreshing because sometimes I'm not sure. Like, my sister's going to tell me what I want to hear. My girlfriend's going to tell me what I want to hear.
And you need those people too.
Yes.
Right? You need those champions by your side. I think you had good exercise buddies. I think
did.
You had all your people. And sometimes our work was hard.
Yes.
And sometimes I would say to you, you have to think about what really matters.
Yes.
Where are you going to put your efforts? Where are you going to not let that one go?
Yes.
And you did a really good job of hearing that. And sometimes that can be hard. Sometimes it might take a few times. Sometimes people leave my office upset with me. I can tolerate it.
I can handle it. Yeah.
You know, I mean, therapy is so interesting because I think people think you're supposed to go and learn all this information and it's all about content. You know, am I depressed? Am I anxious? What are the signs of these disorders? Coping skills. But therapy is also a lot about process, right? And how you engage with someone else.
So true.
Right?
Yes.
Can I hear from someone else? I'm not perfect.
Yes.
Yes. Can I tell someone else they're not meeting my needs? When a client comes in and says to me, I was so mad at you last time, or you didn't hear me last time, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a breakthrough. Because I don't think in life it's been easy for you to say to someone else, you missed it here. And I can take that.
And you can take it.
Of course, that's my job. Of course.
Yes.
So I always say, you know, today's session isn't about content. It's about the process. And you learning that with a healthy individual, you can have that dialogue and both walk away.
Right.
And then come back together.
Yes.
And tolerate it again. Right? Yeah. Life is full of ruptures and repairs. And with two healthy people,
it's another good one. Ruptures and repairs.
You have to learn how to move through them. And sometimes a therapeutic environment is the first time you've been able to move through a rupture with someone who hangs in there with you, who doesn't make it all about you or make it all about your reaction or make it about whether or not the laundry's been done.
Right.
Who can say, wow, we had a fight.
Yes. and maybe it's okay to have an argument if you can come back in a civilized manner and you're not, you know, just it's the way you argue or the way you disagree. Yes. I think it's good to have different opinions and healthy.
Of course.
I never understood why it wasn't. I never understood why opinions, if they weren't the exact same, that they weren't valued. Like,
well, and often
it wasn't healthy.
Yeah, and what you were experiencing, which is not uncommon, is it's just rupture after rupture after rupture. No one hangs in there to make the repair.
Right. That is another good word. Yes.
Yeah, and life is full of ruptures and repairs.
It is.
I mean, with all of us, with our kids, with our coworkers, with our, you know, spouses.
Right. It's a great word, Allison.
And you have to figure out okay, we had the big fight. Now what do we do with it?
Yes. Instead of just sweeping it under the carpet the next day, it's never resolved.
Yes.
So now you fast forward 10 years later, that fight keeps happening.
Yeah.
I remember thinking it's the same argument. It's the same result. There's never a change. And that's because there was no repair.
No repair.
There's rupture. Yeah. It's another, see, I feel like I'm in therapy right now. That's just so good to know for future,
Absolutely.
just in every relationship.
Well, and life is distracting.
Yes.
Right. I mean, and with kids, it can be very, very easy to not. And so if you're not in kind of a toxic pattern or in a relationship with a toxic partner, how do you find that space? And I do think we have this generation, for better or for worse, that is so hyper-focused on parenting.
I totally agree.
I'm giving to my kids. I'm giving to my kids. I'm giving to my kids. And when I'm working with healthy couples, I joke with them, for every podcast you listen to on parenting, listen to one about being a good partner.
So great.
Right? For every chapter of a book you read on parenting, read one about how you and your spouse can connect.
Right.
And I'll get pushback. People will say, I only have these 18 years with my kids, right? I only have these 18 years and I got to pour into them.
Right.
And I'm like, what model kid did you get? Because I don't think parenting ends after 18 years.
Right.
But if you got the model, we're at 18 years, we're done.
No.
That is not on my kid's serial number.
Right. Yes.
Like, I'm in it for the long haul. And I think people can really lose focus on, I better pour into my kids these 18 years. Well, what happened with my relationship?
And that's when you see a lot of relationships falling apart.
Yes.
When the kids leave and go to college and they don't know each other.
Yes.
Because they haven't spent the time to
Yes.
make it a priority.
So that's where we think about the
Yes.
buckets. Balance.
The bucket.
Yes.
I think it's another great word, like your buckets in life. I think that will be really good for people. And I think that, if I was being honest, is another block in our dysfunctional marriage, is it was very kid focused. And honestly, I think my bucket, I just ignored the bucket. I'll just say that was my error. And I poured into the kids because I was like, this bucket has a hole in it and it's not holding water.
Yes.
So I'm just going to fill my bucket over here, because at least it's getting filled and I can see something happening. It's not just,
and I think that is fair to say.
I think I did that.
If one of your buckets is constantly draining and taking, then it's also time to reevaluate.
yes.
You know, and then that becomes really easy to just pour into your kids.
Yes.
And also, if you know your relationship with your spouse isn't about that kind of mutual admiration and respect, it's also great if there's love and intimacy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But just basic respect.
Yes.
And so if you're not
How
getting
far that goes.
Yes.
Huge. Yes.
And when I'm working with people in a co-parenting capacity who have realized their toxic relationships aren't serving them anymore, again, I always say, why would you send a more polite email to a coworker than to your children's other parent?
Amen.
Why would you wouldn't talk to a stranger like this?
Or talk to people on the outside of your home, and then on the inside of the home, it's a different person.
Yes.
And that's hard to reconcile.
And that's
I would
a
have
red
the
flag.
same, that's a red flag.
Yes.
So I think people need to know, what are like some red flags? Like,
Well, so again, there are all these traits.
Different traits.
Overinflated sense of self, kind of inability to tolerate negative feedback.
Huge.
Difficulty in interpersonal relationships. A true narcissist has a real kind of psychological quandary on their hands, right? Because it's very hard to maintain a relationship with anyone and not get some realistic self-feedback.
Right.
Because everyone's going to be like, well, you loaded the dishwasher wrong. Or,
Right.
Even as basic as that.
Yes.
And a person who really cannot tolerate any kind of realistic self-feedback has a lot of difficulty being in a relationship with other people. So they often react with aggression or hostility or punishing and things like that.
Yes.
So if you feel yourself kind of constantly in this dance where nothing you do is right, that's something to really pay attention to.
Pay attention to that.
Because at the end of the day, also, life is short. You got to get on with it.
Yes.
You
got to get on with it. So my sister kept telling me that. She was just, family's close, so they see everything. So she was just like, life, you're young. You're still young. You could still experience love. I think someone else is watching that's in my position, I was like, well, I'll just get my love from my kids. I won't experience love like in a marriage, but I'll find love through my children. So yes, I was so glad that there were people around me that said, no, you can experience actual love. Like it's out there.
Yes.
So like you said, life is short, and to really look at your life. And if you're just a manager of
and I think you did
chaos.
such a good job of even hearing, like, your kids adore you, and that's so clear. But there are also moments, I think, in the process when you realize I can get love from my kids, but I shouldn't be getting these other things from my kids. And that, I think, was one of your greatest strengths, is that, like, I have to also do this piece on my own.
Yes.
I can't, look to them to fill these
my
pieces.
cup.
Yes. And I think it can get really confusing, especially because our kids, thank goodness, love us pretty much no matter what.
Yes.
Even it's always so hard, because if you free yourself from a toxic relationship or someone who has, a personality disorder, a lot of parents really struggle with how their kids still get exposure to that person. And the reality is they might have a different relationship with that person than you did.
Yes.
And I think you stayed open to that too.
Yes.
Right.
You hope so.
This might not be working for me, but I'm still going to stay open to the possibility of what it could be for my kids.
Yes.
Which I think is a really beautiful thing too.
It is a beautiful thing. I mean, a marriage ends, but it shouldn't be parents ending, leaving so we still hope for that. We still pray.
Absolutely.
That would be a beautiful thing.
Yes.
It'd be so good for them and for all. So, okay. So if someone is listening to this and they're like, okay, that's a red flag. Maybe that's what it is. What do they do? Like, I know I ended up getting a divorce, but it was a longer journey. It wasn't an overnight decision. If someone's listening today and you're like, wow, that's what this is. Yes, I'm managing, I'm coping, I'm dealing, I'm stressed. What can they do to take care of themselves,
survive it?
To survive it.
Yes.
I felt like that was the word I used for a long time, and I was just in survival mode. What do we tell them?
Well, I think first of all, I always, I think people tend to overdiagnose right now.
True.
And I just would say I would caution against, all of us when we feel anxious. What do? We go to the internet. we
go to the internet.
Seek information.
Yes.
That may or may not be helpful. And so, I think that the first thing, if you could get in talking with someone, could be really helpful.
Yes.
And I'll meet with sometimes, and this is not to gender stereotype, but it usually does tend to be the female that drives it. Will come in and say, I think I'm married to a narcissist, or I heard you talk about this type of relationship and I'm in it. And I'll say, well, will he come in? And the next week, if he's in there on my couch, I'm like, well, this is already a little inconsistent with maybe, right? Because if he's going to come in and do the work with you, then that suggests to me something different. Not that there aren't dysfunctional patterns, right? A narcissist really has no interest in emotional closeness, no interest in relationships. And so they're not going to kind of put in the time and work and energy.
Right.
So if you solicit from your partner, hey, can we dive in with each other and spend some time together, or try to go see this professional, and they're not interested, then that's a big red flag too. And I think that's
avoiding.
Yes. And again, just continuing down the rupture road, right? Without pausing to kind of dive into each other.
Yes.
Even 5 minutes a day of kind of appreciation or connection can do wonders for a relationship.
Let's talk about that. I love that. Intimacy. I think, that's one thing that I would say, and he would agree, we had zero intimacy. How do you cultivate that? And maybe they don't have intimacy right now. It almost felt like for us, it went too far without it, that it was weird to try,
come back to
it. Yeah. So how does a couple stay in that intimate kind of connection? I do believe that is a powerful thing for a relationship, and you have to have it. Now knowing not having it, and now understanding it, I see how important it is.
Well, and you have to prioritize it.
Yes.
And again, it's so much easier sometimes to talk about these things with people through the way they parent, because I think parenting is so easy for people to latch onto.
Yes.
But if you think about where, I know this is a big thing that you believe in, like intentional parenting, present parenting, we can say that about being married, like intentional coupling, present coupling.
Yes.
Right. And again, why are we giving so much of it to our kids? Not that they don't need it too. And if it comes at a cost to that relationship with our partner.
Yes.
Right. And so just being intentional and present, like you would for your kids.
Yes.
5 or 10 minutes a day with your partner.
Huge.
If it's a walk around the block, someone needs to walk the dog. If it's unloading the dishwasher together, and 5 minutes can make a big difference. But again, no phones, no kids if you can help it.
Yes.
Interruption free. And then people also say to me, once we get going, how do we kind of pull ourselves out of that, fighting, if we start talking about things that are hard. And I go back to that parenting, because when we're all dysregulated, again, it's our inner child kind of coming out.
Yes.
And we learn so much about people through the way they present in arguments and the way they respond in arguments.
Yes.
I learned so much when I'm doing co-parenting with people about how things went down probably in the marriage, and are continuing to go down. But so then think about, okay, this is my spouse, but if it was my 4-year-old having a tantrum, would I say like, F you and slam the door? No.
Right.
I would get down and think to myself,
lower your voice.
Yeah, like, oh my gosh, this little person's making me crazy, but I'm going to give them a hug.
Yes.
I'm going to lean into it.
Yes.
I'm going to stay here and let them know no matter what they throw at me, I'm here. And we don't do it for our spouses.
That is also very powerful. Yes. It's so true.
And it's very easy. I know people can do it.
Yes.
Because I watch them do it with their kids.
Yes.
But, my spouse is having a tantrum. But I have the skills to respond to that.
Yes.
And then hopefully my spouse has the skill to say, wow, I really lost it there, but you were awesome.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Thanks for not throwing it back at me or going tit for tat with me or getting into this power struggle that we often get into in our dysfunctional, toxic patterns.
Yes. The ruptures. Yes. So I feel like as you're talking, that was a big thing. A big piece was that's why there was no change. These ruptures would happen, didn't know how to manage it. And actually, my personality changed a bit because I was talking to Jacqueline about it this weekend. And I do want to, the next question I want to ask is, how do you help your kids with these ruptures? Because she would say, we talked about it this weekend. She's like, when I talk to this person, she responds the way I used to respond. Mm-hmm. She talks louder because she feels like she's not being heard.
Yes.
And so I got into a pattern where I was raising my voice. I never raised my voice. And I would just say it, and then it wasn't heard. And I'd say it, and I'm like, now I'm screaming.
Yes.
And I'm like, but you're not hearing me. And now I see my daughter, and she's doing the same. And how do you, I've been trying to delicately discuss, it's just because you feel like you're not being heard. I think that's why you're yelling, because that's what I did. So how do you help your kids with the ruptures? Like, as adults, we can understand it's because I knew he wasn't hearing me, so I got louder. Yeah. Then I realized that was just crazy. So not to just get louder because he's not going to hear you loud.
Yeah.
How do you help your kids with this type of rupture?
Well, if they have a psychologically minded parent, you model for them. But if they have a dysfunctional parent, it's also kind of learning that, screaming into the wind just makes you really hoarse and tired.
Yes.
Right?
It becomes...
and so they might also have to become more discerning in who they go to for what. And kind of learning about the realities. I had a case not too long ago where the adolescent child wrote a very well-worded apology letter to their parent who... there's been a rupture in the relationship. And the parent came back and was like, he didn't say anything to prop me up in the letter.
Oh, wow.
And I had to say to the parent, I was like, oh, well, I didn't, I'm sorry. I didn't think you needed that from your child.
No.
Right?
So true.
As a parent and professional, I think we pour into the kids.
Yes.
Right? And when I'm working with a family, I don't care how old the kid is.
Wow.
If you're the
so
kid
true.
in the system, you're the kid.
That's
and
what
the
I've
adult
always
is the
believed.
adult.
Yes. Be the adults. Yes.
And there is one way that the modeling should work.
Yes.
And so I think if you feel like the child is maybe being more mature and more open and more insightful than the parent, that's just something to pay attention to.
Yes.
Because it kind of is imbalanced. It's kind of inverted.
Yes.
And then, we see kids become what we would call parentified, because then they take on the parent role.
That happened in our family.
As opposed to the child role.
Wow. I hope you guys are hearing this, because that is powerful. What was that word you just said?
Parentified.
Parentified. I've never heard of that. Yeah. But that definitely happened with my oldest.
Yeah.
That he felt like he needed to be a parent.
Yes. And we can see it.
Yes.
And again, we want to, often in my work, what I'm trying to do is reset the natural order. And even in a divorce, parents up here and then the kids.
Yes. There is a healthy way to have a divorce. Mm-hmm. And there is, right, Allison?
There is. It doesn't have to. A healthy divorce is actually better for your kids than a dysfunctional marriage.
Yes. Also very powerful.
And
Allison.
I told that to you a lot.
Yes.
And that's where you were in the first meeting. You had this kind of idea that marriage had to come first.
Yes.
And even if it was really dysfunctional and toxic, that was first and foremost. But what you've learned is kind of becoming the healthiest version of yourself, even if it's divorced, is so much better for your kids.
So much better. And our kids would agree.
The worst thing is an unhealthy divorce. But
yes. And I will say, in closing with this, I would say, if you're going through a divorce or you're considering a divorce, number one, yes, get a great divorce attorney, but get a therapist. I would say even the therapist before, because I was in marriage counseling. I mean, right up to before I met you. Total waste of time. So be careful who you choose. And I will not say who it was, but it was I never got to speak. I just kept waiting. When is he going to ask me? When is he going to ask me? I never got to speak. And so I just realized that was not going to work. And then I found you. So even before a divorce, because I just knew I wanted to give it everything I've got. And then I could say I gave it everything I got. And, but I'm so glad I went to you for a healthy way to do it on our side. You can only do what you can do.
Absolutely.
But what an amazing thing it would be if two people could just do it. And do you see that? Do you see healthy ways?
I do get calls all the time from people who want to come in together and handle it the right way. And I applaud them out of the gate for that. Again, it doesn't mean it's going to be easy.
Yes.
But staying focused is so important. And you did a really good job, Chaz.
We did a good job. We did a good job.
We did.
I remember one day you called me and you're like, oh my gosh, how are you holding up? You called me and I was like, I'm good, but I think I need to see you this week.
It's good to have your therapist's cell phone number.
It is. It really is. And you were amazing. And the whole team was amazing. And, be careful who you choose on a team, whether it's attorneys or a therapist. But, we've met post-divorce. I continue to see you and check in because she just is a voice of reason. That's what I call you. And I just know I'm going to get the truth. And it'll be a mirror of truth, whether good or bad or change that needs to take place. I love that. Never change. And, yeah, it's been really good.
Yeah, always a treat. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. Yes. We're going to meet again. We're going to do another part 2, and we're going to talk about the effects of social media and how social media is really having an effect on our culture, with our children, with ourselves, in lots of different ways. And we're going to talk more about that on our next episode of Chatting with Chaz. Thank you for joining us and talking about this really incredible topic of, it kind of became mental health, divorce, narcissism, red flags, all of it. Super important. And make sure if you need help, you reach out and get some help and meet with an incredible therapist, Allison Hill. Are you taking clients?
Absolutely. Always.
Okay. She's in Atlanta?
Yes.
So Allison Hill. We'll talk next time. And don't forget to follow us on Chatting with Chaz. www.chattingwithchaz.com, on our Instagram, Chatting with Chaz, and at Linen and Flex Co., where we're all things lifestyle brand. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.